Jungkook's cryptic late-night post, after Taehyung's surprise marriage announcement, leaves ARMY stunned, torn, and searching for the truth. "Did you know all along?" Jungkook's voice broke as he stood under the flickering backstage light, phone still glowing in his trembling hand. Taehyung's wedding photo staring back at him like a slap across the face. The sound of muffled celebration leaked through the green room walls. Laughter, clinking glasses, champagne being poured, yet it all felt a world away. Outside, fans were already flooding social media with Taehyung's surprise announcement. A candid black and white shot of him holding hands with someone whose face was turned away, captioned simply, "For life." That single post, elegant and quiet, had shattered the internet, and Jungkook's carefully held composure. He hadn't been told. Not a word, not a hint. He had stood beside Taehyung through countless highs and lows, shielded him from press storms, laughed with him through the darkest tours. And now, this? Silence. Exclusion. Betrayal. His own phone buzzed again, notifications pouring in like a dam broken. Mentions, questions, hashtags. But he couldn't scroll anymore. His fingers hovered. Then slowly, deliberately, he opened Instagram. Blank screen. Empty caption box. His breathing slowed as he typed without thinking. Raw and unfiltered. "You think you know someone." He didn't add a tag. No emoji. No mention. Just 5 words. He hit post. Within seconds, chaos ignited. The fandom fractured instantly. Some armies cried foul, demanding to know if Jungkook was okay. Others accused him of being bitter, of making it about himself. Some claimed it was a joke. Others saw the truth behind his silence. His name trended globally within minutes. Alongside Taehyung's, backstage, Jungkook's chest felt hollow. A quiet knock broke the suffocating stillness. It was Jimin. He didn't speak, just stared at Jungkook, eyes wide with hurt but understanding. Jungkook looked at him for a long time, long enough to feel the weight of everything they'd buried over the years crash to the surface. "Why him first?" Jungkook finally whispered, and his voice cracked open a fault line. Jimin stepped in, closing the door behind him. "He didn't tell me either," he murmured. "I found out like you did." That didn't soothe the ache. If anything, it deepened it. "He's scared, maybe," Jimin added softly. "Or maybe he didn't want to deal with our reactions." Jungkook let out a bitter laugh. "He didn't even trust us enough to try." The two of them stood in silence, their past threading through every unspoken word, memories of dorm nights, confessions half-formed and always aborted, loyalty that once felt invincible. Now, even that felt cracked. Later that night, alone in his apartment, Jungkook scrolled through the comments flooding his post. He didn't reply. He didn't delete it either. He just stared at the screen until it blurred. On his desk sat a photo frame Taehyung, Jungkook, and Jimin, arms looped around each other from the early years. Jungkook turned the frame down. He didn't sleep. In the days that followed, media exploded with speculation. HYBE released a short, sanitized statement. "We ask fans to respect the privacy of our artists during this joyful time, but nothing could stop the storm." Fan theories spread like wildfire, rumors of internal tension, past arguments, cold rehearsals, and missed dinners. Taehyung, meanwhile, remained silent. No follow-up post, no live, no explanation. And Jungkook? He disappeared for 3 days. When he finally resurfaced, it wasn't with words, but a photo. A grainy, dim-lit image of a quiet alleyway in Seoul. No caption, just a street lamp casting long shadows and a single line of light falling across concrete. The fandom was once again divided. Some said he was mourning. Others said he was bitter. Others still said he was healing. What they didn't know, what none of them saw, was that Jungkook had recorded a voice memo the night Taehyung posted the announcement. He hadn't sent it. He hadn't even saved it. But he had spoken to the darkness, late into the night. His voice rough and honest. "I thought we'd always be honest with each other. Even when it hurt. I never cared about who you married, Hyung. I just thought I mattered enough to know before the rest of the world did." That message was gone now, deleted, but the weight of it lingered. Back in the rehearsal room, When schedules resumed, Jungkook walked in without greeting anyone. The air was brittle. Taehyung was already there, sitting on the far side, avoiding eye contact. But the silence couldn't last forever. It was during a break that Jungkook finally walked over, not saying anything, just standing beside him. Taehyung's shoulders tensed. "I didn't want to lose you," he said suddenly, voice low, as if he'd been rehearsing it for days. "That's why I didn't tell you." Jungkook turned his head, not blinking. "You lost me the second you kept me out," he replied. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even loud. But it hit harder than shouting ever could. And then Taehyung stood up, placing a folded note in Jungkook's palm. "If there's anything left between us, it's in here." Jungkook watched him walk away. The note felt like it weighed more than it should, but he didn't open it. Not yet. He just stood there, the room loud with the hum of music and distant laughter, and he closed his hand around the paper, heart beating like a war drum behind his ribs. Maybe someday he'd read it. Maybe someday he'd forgive him. But for now, all that remained between them was the post, and the silence after. The note remained clutched in Jungkook's hand long after the rehearsal ended, even after the lights had dimmed and the rest of the members had left one by one, their footsteps fading into echoes. The silence inside the practice room was thicker than the fog outside the window. Seoul's skyline blinked distantly, indifferent to the war unraveling quietly in his chest. He stood in the same spot, body unmoving, eyes locked on the floor, yet mind spinning with memories that had no breaks. Taehyung's laughter under neon lights, the way they used to fight over the last piece of fried chicken, how they used to plan fake wedding speeches for each other just to tease the staff, and now, this. The note was folded so precisely, it almost felt foreign, like something written with gloves on, clean, surgical, intentional. Jungkook hadn't opened it not because he was scared of the words inside, but because he already knew they would bleed. Whatever Taehyung wrote would be too carefully crafted, too rehearsed, like a performance instead of a conversation. But silence wasn't working anymore. The ache was only growing. He finally unfolded it, one neat crease after another, a breath, then another. "I didn't know how to tell you without hurting you, so I told no one. That was my mistake. Yeah. But I thought you'd understand me. I thought you'd see me in the silence. The truth is, I didn't want you to see me happy without you in the picture. Because I'm still not sure if I am." There was no signature, no name. Just a smudge of ink at the end that looked like a fingerprint blurred by sweat. Jungkook folded the note back, slower this time. Something inside him shifted. Not healed, not soothed, but acknowledged. Still, it didn't erase the sting of betrayal. It didn't undo the image of Taehyung smiling in that wedding post, wearing the suit they once chose together for a photo shoot in 2020, now repurposed for a milestone Jungkook hadn't even been told about. Back in his apartment, the walls felt too close, too full of memories. He moved to the balcony, wind pressing against his face like an unasked question. The city below buzzed with a million lives, none of which had paused for his heartbreak. But that didn't stop his from breaking anyway. His phone lit up. A message from Yoongi. "You okay?" Jungkook stared at it for a long time, then typed, "No, but I will be." He didn't hit send, because, in truth, he didn't know if he would be. Everything lately felt like a collapsing house, walls caving in slowly, the roof still intact, but foundations cracking every second. He sat on the balcony floor, knees pulled to his chest, letting the cold seep through his hoodie and into his skin like a punishment. In another corner of the city, Jimin was scrolling through headlines that screamed louder than his thoughts. Jungkook's cryptic post sparks rift rumors. Did Taehyung hide his marriage from BTS? Are Jungkook and Taehyung still friends? He wanted to throw his phone across the room, but what would that solve? The internet wasn't the problem. The fractures existed before the post, before the announcement, before even the wedding. The truth was, they had all been drifting, and none of them had the courage to name it. Jimin called Jungkook. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. On the third ring, it went to voicemail. The recorded voice was calm, polite, and achingly unfamiliar. He left a message anyway. "Call me, please." The next morning, Jungkook walked into Hybe's building with sunglasses on, cap pulled low, hands buried in his coat. He wasn't there for meetings. He wasn't there for music. He was looking for a confrontation, or maybe just clarity. But Taehyung wasn't there. Instead, he ran into Namjoon in the hallway. The leader didn't speak right away. Just studied Jungkook's face. Eyes narrowed, not in judgment, but concern. "You look like hell," Namjoon said finally. "Feel worse," Jungkook muttered, voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Namjoon glanced around, then nodded toward a side lounge. "Come on, no cameras there." Inside, the silence between them stretched like a tightrope. "I guess you know," Jungkook said, arms crossed. "I do," Namjoon replied. "And I also know he should have told you. I told him that." Jungkook didn't respond. "I'm not here to defend him," Namjoon continued. "But I am here to remind you this group doesn't survive if we stop talking. Not just performing talking. Maybe I'm tired of being the one who's always expected to forgive first," Jungkook snapped, eyes flashing. "You're not," Namjoon said gently, "but you're often the one who feels things deepest, and that's not weakness." Jungkook looked away, jaw clenched. "Just," Namjoon exhaled, "don't let a post be the last thing between you and someone you once called family." Later that day, Jungkook found himself back in the studio. Alone. Not to work, just to breathe. The room still smelled like old coffee and acoustic foam. The desk was a mess. His guitar still leaned against the wall, strings dusty but intact. He picked it up without thinking, strummed a few notes. His voice, when it came, was fragile, almost afraid of itself. "I thought I knew the way your story would unfold." The lyrics weren't planned. They poured out, unfiltered, from a wound still raw. He didn't record it. He didn't even finish it. But it was enough to make his hands stop shaking. That night, he posted again. Just a short clip, 10 seconds of the studio, of a dim light above the guitar. No caption. The comments poured in. "He's healing. This is his way of speaking now. We see you, Jungkook." He didn't reply to any, but he read them. Every single one. 3 days later, Taehyung posted a photo of the ocean, wind hitting his hair, a quote in the caption, "Some things break so they can be rebuilt stronger." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reach, but it was a start. The next time they saw each other, it was at a rehearsal again. Cameras were rolling, staff were watching, but their eyes found each other across the room like magnets under skin. They didn't smile, they didn't wave, but they nodded, and that was enough. For now, the storm hadn't passed. Not entirely, but the clouds had shifted. And in that fragile in-between, Jungkook finally allowed himself to exhale. Because even if some endings come dressed as silence, the people who matter always find a way back through the noise. The cold outside bit at Jungkook's skin as he stood under the pale flicker of the street lamp, hood pulled low, mask covering most of his face. It was past midnight, and the streets of Hanam were quiet, save for the occasional echo of a passing car or the hush of the wind that rustled through bare tree branches. He wasn't sure why he came out. He hadn't planned it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe he was chasing the stillness, trying to quiet the noise that still hadn't stopped in his head. The air smelled of distant rain and city concrete, a mix he knew too well. His footsteps were slow, careful, as if each step had to be earned after everything that had been said and unsaid. The letter Taehyung had written still sat in his jacket pocket, creased and worn now, like he'd read it too many times. He hadn't. He just couldn't let go of it. He wasn't ready to. The truth was, something in him had shifted since reading those words. They didn't heal anything. They didn't fix the raw edge in his chest, but they exposed a part of Taehyung that Jungkook hadn't seen in a while. Vulnerability, regret. Distance made everything feel sharper. And for so long, they had drifted while pretending they were still standing shoulder to shoulder. But now it was undeniable. Jungkook stopped at the corner of an old bakery they used to visit as trainees. It was closed, of course, but the memory felt loud, louder than the silence. He could still remember how Taehyung used to lean against the brick wall, laughing with his mouth wide open, sunlight turning his brown hair gold. Back then, everything was so simple. Hunger, hope, and a promise that they'd always be in each other's futures. But life had a way of rearranging people, Promises got buried beneath headlines, beneath expectations, beneath walls built by fear. He pulled out his phone, the screen bright in the darkness. His thumb hovered over Taehyung's name in his contacts. He stared at it. No sound, no movement. Just a hesitation so loud it nearly deafened him. And then, his thumb moved, not to call, but to record a voice note. "Hyung," he said, his voice low, rough like gravel. "I'm not gonna pretend I'm okay. I'm still mad, still confused, but I miss you. That's all." He saved the recording, didn't send it, just saved it. It was the closest he'd come to honesty in days. Across the city, Taehyung stood in his hotel room, staring at his reflection. The suit he wore earlier for the private celebration was now draped over the back of the chair. His white shirt was wrinkled, collar loosened, the top buttons undone. His tie was long gone. His fingers hovered over his phone as well, Jungkook's name sitting at the top of his messages, unread, unanswered. He'd seen everything. The cryptic post, the studio clip, even the silence. Taehyung's own post had been received with a storm waves of congratulations, confusion, and speculation. But it was Jungkook's silence that haunted him the most. It was different from the fans, the company, the press. Jungkook's silence was personal. It screamed louder than any backlash. He wanted to say something. But what? That he was sorry? That he didn't know how to handle it? That he thought keeping the wedding a secret was his only way of protecting what little normalcy he had left? He paced the room, each step heavier than the last. The walls felt like they were pressing in, not from guilt, but from longing. A longing to return to something that might never exist again. He finally sat down, opened the chat, and typed, "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now that I hurt you more by staying quiet. I'm sorry." Then he deleted it. Instead, he typed again, "Are you at the studio tomorrow?" He hit send. Jungkook saw the message hours later. He didn't reply immediately. He stared at it, reread it, set the phone down, then picked it up again. Part of him wanted to ignore it, let Taehyung feel what silence tasted like. But another part, one that remembered late-night drives, whispered dreams, and shared victories, knew he couldn't. "Maybe," he replied. The next day, he didn't wear black. He didn't hide under a hoodie or mask. He wore an old denim jacket that Taehyung once borrowed and forgot to return, now washed and faded but still holding the ghost of laughter between its threads. The studio was quiet when he arrived. No staff, no cameras, just a single light overhead and the low hum of the air conditioning. He sat on the couch, guitar beside him, eyes locked on the door. When it finally opened, Taehyung stood there, still, awkward, like he didn't know how to move forward. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Jungkook answered, voice unreadable. The silence between them stretched. Familiar, but foreign. Jungkook stood first, not to embrace, not to yell, just to face him, eye to eye. "Why?" he asked. Taehyung didn't flinch. "Because I was scared you'd look at me differently." "You're my best friend," Jungkook said, and for the first time, his voice cracked. "You were my brother, and you didn't think I deserved to know. I thought if I told you, you'd try to talk me out of it. Would I have been wrong?" Taehyung looked down. "Maybe not. But I needed to do this for me. For once." Jungkook swallowed hard. His chest felt heavy. "I would have stood by you. Even if I didn't agree. I just needed to be there." Taehyung nodded slowly, guilt painting his expression with shadows. "I'm sorry." There it was. Not polished, not perfect, but real. "I missed you," Taehyung added, stepping forward. Jungkook let out a slow breath, one that felt like it had been caught in his lungs for days. "I missed you too." They didn't hug. They didn't cry. But something softened between them. A wall lowered. A bridge began to rebuild. Shaky, but present. Taehyung reached into his pocket and pulled out a small item, Jungkook's old ring. The one he gave him as a joke during their mock wedding shoot years ago. "I kept it," he said. "I don't know why." Jungkook took it, held it in his palm. Because some things aren't just jokes. They both smiled, small but genuine. That evening, they left the studio together. No words. Just two shadows walking side by side under the fading Seoul sky. The city hadn't stopped. The world hadn't paused. But in that quiet moment, something between them did. Later that night, Jungkook posted a photo. A street lamp. Two shadows. No caption. And for the first time in days, the internet didn't erupt in speculation. Instead, it went quiet. Because sometimes, peace doesn't come from explanation. It comes from presence. And they were both there. Together. Again. Under the dim glow of city lights. The silence between them said more than any apology ever could. They didn't speak much as they left the studio that night, both caught in the fragile space between past wounds and uncertain healing. Seoul moved around them in a blur, cars passing, people laughing in distant corners, but for Jungkook and Taehyung, the world had slowed into something quieter, more sacred. The sound of their shoes on the pavement echoed in sync, and it reminded Jungkook of the early years when they would sneak out late at night, not to escape but to breathe. It felt like that again, but heavier now, like both were searching for a version of themselves they had lost along the way. Jungkook's fingers fidgeted with the ring in his pocket. The same ring Taehyung had returned earlier. The weight of it in his hand was oddly grounding, small, circular, and impossibly nostalgic. He remembered how Taehyung had slipped it on his finger all those years ago, laughing dramatically as Jimin pretended to officiate their fake ceremony. They were just kids, then reckless, warm-hearted, unbreakable, in ways only youth can afford. But life had a strange way of testing bonds you thought would never bend. And theirs had bent, stretched thin through fame, pressure, choices they never saw coming. Taehyung glanced at him as they crossed an empty intersection. "You still write?" he asked, voice casual but laced with something tentative. "Sometimes," Jungkook replied after a beat. "Not as much lately." "You should," Taehyung said. "Your words always said what you couldn't." Jungkook offered a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maybe I'm just afraid of what'll come out now." Taehyung nodded, understanding. They continued walking in silence until they reached a small park tucked between tall apartment buildings. The playground was empty, the swings swaying gently in the wind. Without a word, Taehyung walked over and sat on one of the benches, and Jungkook followed. "I thought being happy would feel better than this," Taehyung admitted suddenly, voice low, gaze on the pavement. Jungkook's eyes flicked toward him. "You're not?" Taehyung hesitated. "I love her. That part's real. But I didn't expect the cost to be so high. I didn't expect to feel like I lost something the same day I gained everything." Jungkook didn't speak. He stared at his hands, the shadows cast by the park lights flickering over his knuckles. "You didn't lose me," he said softly. "But you did break something, and it's going to take time." Taehyung turned to him, eyes glassy. "I know." The wind rustled leaves along the ground, and in that quiet park, two men who had once been inseparable sat with the weight of too many words and too much silence. Jungkook broke the stillness with a breath. "Do you remember that night in Tokyo? The hotel rooftop?" Taehyung chuckled. "When we got locked out and had to wait for staff in our pajamas?" "Yeah." Jungkook smiled faintly. "You told me that night you'd never get married unless we were all in the same room, that it wouldn't mean anything otherwise." Taehyung closed his eyes, shame spreading across his features. "I remember." "You broke your own promise," Jungkook said. Not accusingly, just sadly. Taehyung nodded. "I think I stopped making space for the past because I was afraid it would hold me back." "But it wasn't your past," Jungkook said. "It was your foundation." That struck something in both of them, a shared ache that couldn't be denied anymore. Back at home, Jungkook found himself sitting at the piano. He hadn't touched it in weeks. His fingers hovered over the keys before he pressed down gently, the first notes soft, uncertain. He played a melody that had no structure, no purpose, just emotion. It spilled out like a whisper, like the echo of something forgotten. As he played, lyrics started forming in his mind. hesitant at first, then clearer. You walked ahead. I stood behind. Between your joy and my quiet mind, I lost the words. You lost the time. And now the silence feels like mine. He stopped, the lump in his throat too heavy to swallow. The song wasn't done, but maybe neither was he. A few days passed. Things didn't suddenly go back to normal. There was no grand reunion, no dramatic hug captured on camera. But there were small things. A late-night message from Taehyung asking about a chord progression. A shared laugh at a rehearsal over something trivial. A hand on the shoulder that lingered just long enough to mean more than it said. The fans, meanwhile, continued to speculate. Every post was dissected, every glance analyzed. Some saw hope, others saw distance. But the truth lived in the quiet, away from cameras, away from the spotlight.
It was Jimin who brought them all together one night. He booked out a small studio room and told everyone to show up. No managers, no staff, just them. The seven. When Jungkook walked in, the room was dimly lit, incense burning faintly in the corner. Namjoon was already there, sipping tea. Jin had snacks spread out on the table. Yoongi sat quietly in the corner, scrolling his phone. Hobi bounced on his toes, visibly excited. Jimin stood in the center like a conductor preparing an orchestra. And then Taehyung walked in. No one said anything for a moment, and then Jimin clapped his hands. "Okay," he said. "We're not here to fix anything tonight. We're not here to make it look okay for the cameras. We're just here because we're still us, and I think we forgot that." Jungkook felt his chest tighten. They spent the night talking, laughing, arguing even, but there were no walls, no filters, just them, raw and real. And for the first time in weeks, Jungkook saw Taehyung again, not the man from the headline, not the stranger from the post, but his friend, his Taehyung, the one who once held his hand during a panic attack, who once wrote songs with him until dawn, who once called him his soulmate without a hint of hesitation. Later that night, when most of them had gone home, Taehyung lingered back with Jungkook. "Did I ruin it?" he asked. Jungkook looked at him for a long time, then shook his head. "No, but it's different now." Taehyung's eyes fell. "But maybe different doesn't mean worse," Jungkook added. Taehyung looked up, hopeful. Jungkook smiled, soft and tired. "We'll find out." The next morning, Jungkook posted another photo. This time it wasn't a street lamp, it wasn't shadows. It was a throwback, Taehyung asleep on his shoulder during a flight. Jungkook's eyes peeking over the mask, sleepy and amused. The caption was just 2 words. "Still here." And this time, the internet didn't explode. It breathed. Under the muted light of early morning, Jungkook stood by the kitchen window, coffee steaming in his hand, the world outside still bathed in a pale, silver-blue calm. His apartment was silent except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional pop of the heater coming on. The night had been long, sleep intermittent, his thoughts restless. But there was something different in the air now. Not closure, not peace, but maybe the beginning of understanding. He scrolled through the post again, the old photo of Taehyung asleep on his shoulder, the caption "Still here." The response had been overwhelming. The comments flooded in from every direction, fans relieved, others confused, many in tears. But for Jungkook, it wasn't about the public. It wasn't even about the message. It was about the moment, about reclaiming a thread of something that had once felt so irrevocably severed. He thought about how long it had taken to reach that point. How many days had passed with silence like a weight on his chest. How many glances were exchanged during rehearsals. How many times they avoided eye contact during meetings, interviews, even meals. It had become a quiet war of restraint. 2 people afraid of saying the wrong thing, so they said nothing at all. But the night Jimin brought them together changed everything. Jungkook had felt it in his bones, the warmth of the room, the laughter that didn't need effort, the silence that no longer felt like avoidance but comfort. He had watched Taehyung that night, really watched him, and saw not the public figure, not the man who posted a wedding photo to the world before telling his brothers, but the boy who once cried when his dog got sick, who once spent an entire night building a Lego city in the dorm living room, who once leaned on him when the world felt too heavy. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It wasn't a post. It was something quieter, deeper, and slower. It was a process, and Jungkook wasn't fully there yet, but he wanted to be. The ring sat on the counter beside his mug, small, worn, but intact. The fake wedding ring Taehyung had once placed on his hand with a laugh and a wink, now symbolizing something heavier. A bond not of romance but of history, of shared survival, of knowing each other in ways no one else ever would. He picked it up, twirling it between his fingers. Then suddenly he slid it onto his pinky. It didn't fit like it used to. He had grown. They both had. Later that afternoon, he walked into the dance studio earlier than usual. The room was empty, sunlight streaming through the windows in golden stripes across the floor. He set his bag down and walked to the mirror. His reflection stared back, tired, thoughtful, quietly determined. He closed his eyes and started to move. Not a routine, not choreography, just motion, just feeling. Every beat that had lived inside his chest for weeks began pouring out through his limbs, the confusion, the hurt, the memories, the laughter. He let it all go into the movement, not caring how it looked, only how it felt. He didn't notice Taehyung watching from the doorway. The older man said nothing, just leaned quietly against the doorframe, arms crossed, a faint sadness in his gaze. When Jungkook finally stopped, panting, sweaty, he turned and froze. Their eyes met. "You always danced like that when you were in pain," Taehyung said gently. Jungkook didn't reply. He reached for a towel and wiped his face. "I never wanted to be the one causing it," Taehyung added, stepping inside, closing the door softly behind him. "You weren't the only cause," Jungkook said after a beat, "but you were part of it." Taehyung nodded. "I know." There was a pause, uncomfortable but honest. "You want to talk?" Jungkook asked. "I do," Taehyung said. So they sat, on the floor, back against the mirrored wall, two men whose lives had been entangled since their teenage years, now trying to untangle a knot that had grown more complex with time. "I didn't plan to keep it from you," Taehyung began. "It just got bigger, the secret, and the longer I waited, the harder it became to share." "Why did you wait?" Jungkook asked, voice quiet but steady. "I thought I was protecting something. My relationship, my sanity. I didn't want to deal with the world's opinions before I even had time to understand what it meant for me." "And us?" Jungkook's voice cracked slightly. "Did we just not matter in that moment?" "You mattered too much," Taehyung whispered. "That's why it was so hard. I was afraid of losing you. I thought if I told you and you were disappointed, that would hurt more than anything." Jungkook looked away, jaw tight. "But you hurt me anyway." "I know," Taehyung said, "and I hate myself for it." The words hung there, suspended in the space between confession and consequence. "I wanted to be there," Jungkook said. "Even if I didn't agree, I would have stood beside you. I would have figured it out with you." "I know that now," Taehyung replied. "I was stupid." There was a long silence. Then Jungkook sighed. "You were scared." Taehyung looked at him, eyes wide. "And I get it," Jungkook continued. "Because I was scared too, scared that you were leaving without saying goodbye, that maybe I was part of your past but not your future." Taehyung's throat tightened. "You'll always be part of my future." "Then act like it," Jungkook said, voice thick with emotion. "Show up, be honest. Don't hide behind press statements and cryptic captions." "I will," Taehyung promised, "from now on." Another silence, but softer now, forgiving. "Do you regret it?" Jungkook asked suddenly. "The wedding?" Taehyung smiled faintly. "No, but I regret how I handled it." Jungkook nodded slowly. "You still wear the ring," Taehyung noted, eyes flicking to Jungkook's hand. "Not for the wedding," Jungkook replied. "For the memory, for what it used to mean." "And what does it mean now?" Jungkook looked at it. "It means we're still here." A breath, a shared look. Later that week, during a group schedule, the members gathered for a shoot. The energy was lighter than before, the air no longer thick with tension. Jungkook and Taehyung sat beside each other during the interview. They didn't speak much on camera, but every now and then their shoulders bumped. Their eyes met. A private understanding passed between them like a silent pact. After the shoot, fans caught a behind-the-scenes clip. Taehyung handing Jungkook a bottle of water. Jungkook smiling, soft and unguarded. Taehyung whispering something that made Jungkook's eyes narrow in playful annoyance. The clip went viral. They're okay. It's not perfect, but it's them. Still here. Backstage, Jimin approached Jungkook and nudged him. You're better when you forgive, you know. I'm trying, Jungkook replied. I know, Jimin said, wrapping an arm around his shoulder. And I'm proud of you. That night, Jungkook went live for the first time in weeks. He didn't talk much, just played music. Read comments, smiled now and then, but near the end he looked directly at the camera. We're all human, he said. We mess up, we hurt each other, but the real test is whether we come back, whether we keep choosing each other even when it's hard. He paused. And I still choose him. He ended the live. No fireworks, no explanations. Just a quiet truth, shared with the people who had watched them grow from boys to men. In the days that followed, Taehyung released a song. Fans immediately noticed the lyrics. If I went too far ahead, would you still wait for me to turn around? If I broke the bridge we built, would you help me lay new ground? Jungkook commented on the post. Just one word. Always. And just like that, a new chapter began, not without scars, not without reminders of what was nearly lost, but with hope, with presence, with quiet love that didn't need to be shouted to be understood. They were still here. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The night air had that sharp clarity only winter could bring, clear enough to see stars even through the faint mist of the city's lights, cold enough to make every breath feel like glass in the lungs. Jungkook stood on the rooftop of his apartment building, a thick sweater pulled over his frame, his hands tucked into the sleeves. The sky above Seoul stretched endlessly, a quiet canvas of black and fading silver, and beneath his feet, the city pulsed like a living organism. Somewhere down there, someone was probably playing one of their old songs. Somewhere, a fan was still trying to understand what had truly happened between them. He tilted his head back, letting the wind brush past his face, and closed his eyes. The ache was still there, not as sharp, not as suffocating, but present. Healing didn't arrive in clean lines or sudden revelations. It came in the form of old routines slowly feeling safe again, of songs returning to his head while in the shower, of walking into the practice room and no longer bracing for cold silence. It came in Taehyung showing up without a camera watching. He heard the footsteps before the door opened behind him. Familiar gait, no hesitation, no announcement. I figured you'd be up here, Taehyung said, voice low, gentle. Jungkook didn't turn around, figured or hoped. Taehyung walked forward until they were standing side by side. He didn't answer the question. He didn't need to. Silence was its own kind of language between them now, one that wasn't filled with awkwardness but with memory. For a moment they just stood there, staring out at Seoul together. The wind pushed against them but not between them. She said something interesting last night, Taehyung finally murmured. Jungkook arched a brow. Your wife. Taehyung nodded. She asked me if I was happy, even if I didn't have the closure I thought I needed from my past. Jungkook didn't answer right away. What did you say? I said I wasn't sure, Taehyung admitted, and then she told me to go find it. Jungkook looked down at the city below. Closure isn't something you find, it's something you accept. Then maybe I'm not looking for closure, Taehyung said, his voice barely above the wind. Maybe I'm just hopping. I haven't lost you for good. Jungkook didn't move. His eyes glistened faintly under the stars. You didn't lose me, but you did leave me behind for a while. Taehyung's throat tightened. I know. Do you know what hurt the most? Jungkook said, turning to him slowly. It wasn't the marriage. It wasn't the secret. It was realizing that when the biggest moment of your life came, you didn't think I was part of it. Taehyung's eyes welled up. I thought if I told you, if I looked you in the eyes and said it, I'd see the disappointment, and I couldn't take that. I was disappointed, Jungkook confessed, but I would have chosen to be there anyway, for you. The honesty hung in the air like frost. They stood in silence again, not because there was nothing more to say, but because they needed to sit with what had been said already. Then Taehyung pulled something from his coat, a small notebook, weathered at the edges. He handed it to Jungkook without a word. What's this? Jungkook asked. My words, the ones I didn't say when I should have. Jungkook opened it. The first page held his name, not JK, not Kookie, but Jungkook. And then beneath it, line after line of handwriting, uneven and raw. Taehyung looked away. It started as a letter, then it became too long, too messy, so I kept adding to it. Whenever I thought about you, whenever I missed you, whenever I didn't know how to come back. Jungkook ran his fingers over the ink. You could have just talked to me. I couldn't, Taehyung said, but I'm here now, and I don't want to miss another chance. Jungkook nodded, his throat too tight for words. He tucked the notebook close to his chest. Back inside, the heater buzzed softly as they sat on the floor in Jungkook's living room, the lights low, their phones forgotten. Old songs played from a playlist neither of them remembered building. They talked, not just about the hurt, but about everything, about the tour, about the comeback, about the members, about the days when they used to crash on each other's beds just to avoid being alone. I still write, Taehyung admitted, but I don't share much anymore. You should, Jungkook said. You've always had something to say. So have you, Taehyung replied. Jungkook looked down. Maybe we should say it together. Taehyung smiled. A duet. A story, Jungkook corrected. Not just in music, but everything, a way back. The next day, the news broke quietly. No headlines, no drama, just a short video posted to their shared YouTube channel. 2 chairs, 2 microphones, no script. Just Taehyung and Jungkook, laughing, teasing, reminiscing. Fans flooded the comments. They're okay. This feels like breathing again. Still here, still together. And it was true. They were, maybe not the same as before, maybe better in some ways, more honest, more aware of how fragile love could be, even between brothers. The duet came a month later. A song called Echo, written by both, produced in the same studio where their silence once screamed louder than any beat. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about presence. The chorus held the line fans couldn't forget. Even if your voice fades, I'll be the echo that stays. And when they performed it live for the first time, standing side by side under the soft glow of stage lights, there were no forced smiles, no fake energy. Just 2 voices intertwined, scarred but strong. After the final note, the crowd roared. And Jungkook turned just enough, and whispered so only Taehyung could hear. Still here? Taehyung smiled back. Always. Applause still rang in Jungkook's ears long after the stage lights dimmed and the crowd began to filter out, their cheers echoing like waves against the walls of the arena. The warmth of the moment pulsed in his chest, but it wasn't the kind that came from popularity or performance. It was something quieter, deeper, like a part of his soul that had been frozen was finally beginning to thaw. Taehyung had left the stage first, giving him a brief nod before disappearing behind the curtain, the same way he always used to back in the early days. No fanfare, just a simple gesture that said I'm still with you. And Jungkook, for the first time in months, let himself believe it. The dressing room backstage smelled of sweat and hairspray, the energy thick with post-performance adrenaline. Jungkook entered slowly, dropping his earpiece and towel onto the counter, letting the silence settle over him like a second skin. His body was buzzing, his heart still racing, not from nerves but from something else. Something he didn't dare name. The notebook Taehyung had given him remained tucked deep in his bag, but the words inside it had already become part of him. He had read them every night before sleep. Lines scratched out and rewritten. Pages inked with vulnerability. Some angry, some aching, some absurdly beautiful, but all of them real. And more than anything, Jungkook had wanted that reality back. The one where Taehyung didn't feel like a memory. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Jungkook turned toward the door just as it cracked open. Taehyung leaned against the frame, a water bottle in one hand, a half-smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You good?" he asked, voice low. Jungkook nodded. "Yes, you." Taehyung entered the room without waiting for an invitation, the way he used to. He tossed the water bottle onto the couch and dropped into the seat beside Jungkook, exhaling a long breath. "We nailed it," he said softly, almost like he was afraid to say it out loud. Jungkook allowed himself to smile. "Yeah, we did." They sat like that for a moment, breathing in the same rhythm, letting the silence between them settle into something comfortable. "You remember Busan?" Taehyung asked suddenly. Jungkook blinked. "Which part?" "The beach. That night we got lost trying to find the hotel again." Jungkook laughed, the sound breaking through the weight in the room. "You told the taxi driver the wrong hotel name, and we ended up in a completely different district." Taehyung chuckled, "And then we decided it was fate and just stayed out until sunrise." "First time I saw you cry and try to pretend it was just the wind," Jungkook teased. Taehyung looked down, smiling to himself. "I cried because I felt like everything was slipping too fast, like we were growing too fast and I couldn't hold on to all of it." Jungkook's smile faded slowly. "That's still how it feels sometimes." Taehyung nodded. "It doesn't stop." The vulnerability between them wasn't sharp anymore. It didn't cut like it had before. Now it felt like an open wound that had learned how to breathe. Taehyung turned to him. "You're still the person I trust most in the world, even if I forgot how to show it." Jungkook looked at him, not blinking. "Then don't forget again." "I won't," Taehyung said, without hesitation. "If we fall out again, I'll knock on your door until my knuckles bleed." Jungkook let out a soft laugh, but his voice was serious. "You don't need to bleed, just show up." "I'm here," Taehyung said, "for real this time." There was a pause, then Jungkook whispered, "I believe you." The door opened again as Jimin peeked in, raising a brow. "Am I interrupting something or just a dramatic reconciliation scene?" Jungkook rolled his eyes, grinning. "Both." "Good," Jimin said, stepping in and flopping onto the couch like it was his own. "Because I've been holding my breath for weeks." Taehyung smirked. "You're dramatic." Says the man who got secretly married and then dropped the news like an album teaser, Jimin shot back. Jungkook laughed harder than he had in weeks. The sound filled the room, warm and sharp, and full of everything they'd nearly lost. And that night they didn't go home separately. Instead, they all ended up at Jungkook's place, crammed onto his couch with takeout boxes balanced on their knees, a movie playing but barely watched. They talked. They laughed. Taehyung leaned into Jungkook's shoulder at one point and didn't move for the rest of the night. In the following weeks, things didn't change overnight, but something shifted in the way they looked at each other on stage, the way they spoke in interviews, the way they shared stories behind the scenes. It wasn't forced. It wasn't even spoken about publicly. It just lived in the background, quiet and whole. When the next performance came around, they stood together during rehearsals without needing to avoid eye contact. They made harmonies sound effortless. They smiled for real. And during one live show, Taehyung placed a hand on Jungkook's shoulder during the outro and whispered something that fans couldn't catch. But Jungkook's face changed immediately. Later that night, Jungkook posted a photo of the two of them from years ago. No caption, no hashtags. Taehyung commented within minutes. "Like we never left." And Jungkook replied, "We didn't." The notebook now sat on Jungkook's nightstand, open to a page he'd read often. "You don't just belong in my past, you're woven into my now." He wasn't sure if the world would ever fully understand what had happened between them. The way two people could drift apart even with the world watching, even while standing on the same stage. But maybe they didn't need to understand. Because sometimes the real story didn't live in headline or trending hashtags. It lived in quiet rooftops, in handwritten notebooks, in shared water bottles and silent apologies. It lived in one hand on a shoulder, in eyes that said, "I'm still with you." And for Jungkook, that was enough. Because Taehyung was no longer just someone from his memories. He was present, still messy, still imperfect, but still here. And that meant everything. The sky over Seoul turned lavender as dawn crept over the city. Jungkook stood barefoot on the hardwood floor of his apartment, his fingertips grazing the edge of the notebook Taehyung had given him. His breath moved in slow waves, like he was learning how to breathe again. That night had stayed with him, the quiet weight of Taehyung against his shoulder, Jimin's laughter between them, the low hum of friendship restored without needing to explain every fracture. They hadn't solved everything, and maybe they never would, but they were no longer strangers orbiting the same stage. They were trying, and in a world that moved too fast, trying was everything. The early morning silence was warm, familiar, like the calm that used to settle in the dorm when everyone was asleep, but someone left the hallway light on. Jungkook picked up his phone and scrolled through their shared group chat. Hobi had sent a video of their old 2016 performance, adding dramatic emojis and capital letters. Taehyung had replied with a crying face and, "Why did I wear that hat?" Jimin responded, "Because none of us could stop you." Yoongi added, "Fashion crime, life sentence." Even Namjoon had chimed in with a photo of himself from the same era, adding, "We've all done time." Jungkook laughed softly. He typed a message and paused. Then he sent it without overthinking. "Let's not wait years next time." A second later, Taehyung reacted with a heart emoji. Jungkook closed the chat, placed the phone on the kitchen counter, and started boiling water for coffee. As the kettle warmed, he leaned against the sink, watching the sky light. That moment, like so many recently, felt suspended between memory and renewal. He didn't need answers from Taehyung anymore. Not all of them. He just needed this, presence, sincerity, and the small, constant reminders that they were still willing to fight for the bond they once almost lost. They had begun working on something new, something quiet, intimate, a joint track but not for any album or comeback, just for them. It started on a quiet afternoon in the company's third-floor studio, the one with the tall window and the beat-up couch they always argued over. Jungkook had been humming a melody for days, something that sounded like rain and breath and unsaid words. Taehyung had been carrying fragments of lyrics scribbled in napkins, margins, phone memos at 3 a.m. They met halfway, one on the piano, the other with a pen. Jungkook played the first few notes, tentative, like laying bricks for a new home. Taehyung's voice followed, low, raspy, not polished, just real. "Sometimes silence isn't quiet, sometimes home is just a name, but you showed up when I vanished and you stayed when I blamed." They paused, not because it wasn't working, but because it felt too real too fast. Jungkook glanced at him. "Is this about us?" Taehyung leaned back, smiling faintly. "Isn't everything we write?" They didn't record it that day. They just kept playing, writing, adjusting, laughing. It felt like the early years again, like sneaking into a studio at night just to see what would come out if they dared to be honest. But they weren't boys anymore. There was depth now. Scars, too, but those made the notes resonate deeper. And when they finally did record it, they didn't announce it. They just uploaded it quietly to SoundCloud, without a teaser, without a title. The fans found it anyway. They called it Bridge. No chorus, no structure, just two voices weaving in and out like they were building something word by word, note by note. And maybe they were. The response was overwhelming, not in scale but in emotion. Comments poured in about healing, about friendships lost and found, about the beauty of honesty. Fans didn't need details. They could feel it. At rehearsal the next week, Jungkook entered the room to find Taehyung already there, lying on his back in the middle of the floor, headphones in, eyes closed. Jungkook dropped his bag and nudged his knee with a toe. "Earth to Kim, Taehyung." Taehyung peeked up with a smirk. "I was listening to our song." "Oh yeah," Jungkook raised a brow. "How's it holding up?" Taehyung sat up slowly, stretching. "It feels like an apology, but also like a promise." Jungkook tilted his head. "Promise for what?" Taehyung met his eyes. "That we'll never go that long without talking again." Jungkook's heart tightened. He nodded. "Deal." They started running the choreography, the familiar rhythm returning like muscle memory. But even in the movement, there was something looser now, a freedom they hadn't allowed themselves in a long time. After rehearsal, they sat side by side against the mirror, catching their breath. Taehyung reached over, poked Jungkook's arm. "By the way," he said, "she wants to meet you." Jungkook blinked. "Your wife?" Taehyung nodded. "She asked why I hadn't introduced you properly yet. I told her I was waiting for the right time." "And now is the right time?" Jungkook asked quietly. "I think so," Taehyung said, "if you're ready." Jungkook was quiet for a long moment, then finally said, "I am." They met a few days later at a quiet restaurant outside of the city, the kind of place where no one asked for photos and the staff pretended they didn't recognize you. Taehyung looked nervous, which was rare. His hands kept adjusting the sleeves of his coat, his eyes flicking toward the door every other second. When Jungkook walked in, Taehyung stood immediately. "She's inside," he said. Jungkook nodded. They entered together. And it was easy. She was warm, funny, deeply perceptive. She didn't try too hard. She asked about Jungkook's music, his photography, the last movie that made him cry. She didn't bring up the post or the headlines or the distance that had once existed between them. Over dinner, Taehyung reached across the table, took her hand gently. She smiled, and Jungkook, watching that, realized something inside him had finally settled. There was no resentment, no tension, just acceptance, and surprisingly a kind of relief. Because Taehyung looked genuinely happy, and Jungkook wasn't afraid of being left behind anymore. As they stepped out into the night air, Taehyung walked beside him, hands in his coat pockets, eyes on the stars. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Thanks for asking," Jungkook replied. "I think she likes you better than me now," Taehyung teased. "Obviously," Jungkook deadpanned. They laughed together, loud and real. Back at home, Jungkook stood by his window again, the city glowing beneath him. He looked over at the notebook once more, still resting on the nightstand, but he didn't open it this time. He didn't need to. Because the words were no longer trapped on those pages. They were alive. In music, in shared laughter, in the quiet comfort of a bond repaired not by force but by choice. And when Jungkook picked up his phone and opened his camera, he didn't think twice before snapping a photo of the view. He posted it with a simple caption. "Healing looks like this." He didn't tag anyone. He didn't need to. Because those who knew, knew. And those who stayed, stayed. The days blurred softly into one another after that dinner, folding into a rhythm Jungkook hadn't realized he'd missed. Not the frantic packing of comeback seasons or the constant tension of unsaid things, but the quiet steadiness of presence, real mutual presence. There was no dramatic turning point, no sudden declaration of complete healing, just a sense that something buried deep in the soil of their friendship had begun to grow again. Jungkook found himself gravitating toward the studio more often, not because he had to, not because a manager had penciled it into a schedule, but because he wanted to create. And somewhere in the process of healing with Taehyung, he'd unearthed something in himself, a hunger not just to perform but to feel. The music that came out of him now was messier, rawer, full of texture and memory. One evening he sat on the studio floor, guitar resting on his lap, the lights dimmed to a gentle glow. The walls echoed softly with the strum of his fingers, the chords loose and slow. He wasn't recording. He didn't even know if this melody had a name yet. He just played, letting it bleed out of his fingertips, no filter. Taehyung entered without knocking. He leaned in the doorway, quiet, watching, the kind of silence that didn't need explanation. Jungkook didn't stop playing. After a few minutes, Taehyung walked in and sank to the floor opposite him, his eyes drifting closed as he listened. "What is it?" he asked softly, not opening his eyes. Jungkook shrugged, "Something that feels like staying." Taehyung smiled at the phrase, "Can I write to it?" Jungkook nodded. They worked until nearly 2 a.m., trading verses like passing old secrets back and forth. The song unfolded like a conversation they never had the words for before, full of regret, of quiet apology, of resilience. The chorus crystallized from a line Taehyung scribbled halfway through the night. "Even if we walked apart, my shadow still knew where you were." It was unlike anything they'd written before. Not flashy, not built for charts. It was vulnerable in a way that could only come from knowing what it meant to almost lose each other. They didn't share it right away. It wasn't time. But it existed, and that was enough. Outside the studio, life went on, promotions, brand deals, interviews. Their lives were still painted with the palette of global fame, but something had softened underneath. When they sat beside each other now, it didn't feel like performance. When their shoulders brushed in crowded hallways, they didn't tense. And fans began to feel it too, not because of overt displays or headline-grabbing moments, but because of the small, human things. A look, a shared laugh. The way their energies synced again, even in stillness. One afternoon, during a recording break, Jimin found Jungkook in the company rooftop garden, a place that rarely anyone visited unless they needed to disappear. Jungkook was crouched by one of the potted citrus trees, his fingers gently tracing the curve of a leaf. "You're getting poetic," Jimin teased. Jungkook didn't turn. "Do you think people ever really forgive, or do they just decide to live with the memory differently?" Jimin exhaled and walked over, sitting beside him on the concrete ledge. "I think forgiveness isn't about forgetting the wound. It's about choosing not to let it be the only story you tell." Jungkook finally looked at him. "You always sound like a lyric." "Comes with being the emotional backbone of the group," Jimin smiled. There was a pause. Wind brushed against their hair. "You did good," Jimin added, softer now. "With him, you didn't shut him out." "I wanted to," Jungkook admitted. "There were days I thought I couldn't look at him without thinking of what he didn't say." "But you looked anyway," Jimin said. "That's what matters." Jungkook nodded. Later that evening, a group dinner was arranged. Just the 7 of them, no staff, no cameras, no obligations. A quiet restaurant was booked under a pseudonym, and they arrived in staggered pairs, grinning like schoolboys dodging the press. It felt like home. The kind of home that wasn't a place, but a collection of voices that knew how to harmonize even without music. They toasted to nothing specific. The clinking of glasses and laughter spilling over private jokes older than any album. At one point, Taehyung nudged Jungkook and held out his phone. He'd pulled up a photo from years ago, a blurry selfie taken on a tour bus, both of them asleep, heads pressed together. "Did you know the fans thought this was staged?" he laughed. "Some kind of PR thing." Jungkook scoffed. "We couldn't fake that exhaustion if we tried." Taehyung's smile faded to something more reflective. "I didn't realize how much I missed you until I saw that again." Jungkook looked at the screen. Then softly, "Don't wait to miss me next time." Taehyung met his gaze. "I won't." As dessert arrived, Jin stood dramatically, clearing his throat. "Before we all go back to pretending to be cool in public," he said, raising his glass, "I just want to say we survived another season." Everyone raised their glasses, murmuring variations of damn right and somehow. And Jungkook, looking around the table at the people who had seen every version of him, broken, angry, lost, in love, felt something unshakable root itself in his chest. He wasn't alone, not anymore. Weeks later, when the song was finally ready, they made a different decision. They released it with a short film. It began with silence, just footsteps echoing in a long hallway, a close-up of a notebook, a rooftop, two figures sitting side by side not speaking. And then the music. Even if we broke the thread, my hands still knew the knot. The visuals weren't flashy, just snapshots of real moments, not reenactments but real, candid, laughter caught off guard, a shot of Taehyung tying Jungkook's shoe backstage, Jungkook adjusting Taehyung's collar during a photo shoot, no stylists, no directors, just them. And fans understood, immediately. The comment section flooded. This is the most personal thing they've ever done. Not just a song, this is a healing. They found each other again. Still here, still always. The final scene of the short film faded to black, then lingered for a beat before a line appeared in white. Sometimes the echo is all you need to know the voice still exists. They didn't promote it. Didn't do interviews. They let the story speak for itself. And in a world obsessed with noise, that silence said everything. One night, months later, after another long day of schedules, Jungkook sat again at his window, city lights stretching endlessly in front of him. He opened the notebook Taehyung had given him. It was full now, every page scribbled with the weight of their journey. But on the last page, something new had been added in a familiar scrawl. If we ever lose each other again, read this, then come find me. Jungkook smiled. He picked up his pen. And beneath it he wrote, I never left, I just got quiet. Then he closed the notebook. Not to end the story, but to carry it forward.